You and I have proved here again tonight that we can make a difference. So let us stay involved until we have elected a leadership that once again can make us proud of this great nation. Good night, and God bless you all.
Senator George McGovern and his jubilant supporters in Los Angeles celebrating a clean sweep of all 4 primaries yesterday and a big step toward the Democratic presidential nomination. We'll have the details in a moment.
From Los Angeles, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Roger Mudd reporting from the CBS newsroom in New York. And Eric Severide in Washington. David Shoemaker in Los Angeles. Bruce Morton in Houston. Bill Curtis in San Francisco. Richard Threlkeld north of Hue, South Vietnam. And Ike Pappas in Miami Beach, Florida.
Coronet announces a vintage year for the bathroom. In a year when other bath tissues have gone flat, we've gone wild. Wild with great designs in Coronet Rosé, Beaujolais, and sparkling champagne. 2-ply and quilted for softness, with a fresh scent that's only mildly intoxicating. Wild Coronet bath tissue. We're on our way. Coronet bath tissues from Georgia Pacific. There's a pretty 4-roll flower pack, too.
Don't write with a blueberry. With a blueberry, you're going to get a half a T, a piece of Y. Besides, it would take you 2 boxes of blueberries to write 1 postcard. That's how small they are. If you must write with a fruit, write with a Bic banana. A smooth, writing fine line marker beauty. It comes in a lot more colors than a blueberry, and it costs a lot less money than a car. 29 cents. The Bic banana.
Good evening. His rivals will try, but Senator George McGovern may now be unbeatable for the nomination to oppose President Nixon. McGovern's 4 primary victories, especially the big one here in California, have put him in a commanding position. With 99% of the vote counted, McGovern defeated Senator Hubert Humphrey here by 45% to 40%. Alabama Governor George Wallace, on a write-in, got 5%, but that figure will be changed by write-ins yet to be counted. Wallace ran a surprisingly strong race in New Mexico, beating out Humphrey for a share of delegates, which are divided proportionately between the 2 top leaders there. And with that count almost complete, McGovern had 33%, Wallace 29%, and Humphrey 26%. The victories in California, New Mexico, South Dakota, and New Jersey put McGovern far out in front in convention delegate strength. The New Jersey returns are subject to slight change, but as the situation stands now, McGovern has 910 delegate votes, bound or otherwise committed to him. That's almost a 3-to-1 lead over Wallace or Humphrey. With that kind of delegate lead now, and an anticipated victory in New York in 2 weeks, any stop McGovern move will be hard put to find an effective vehicle. Even while McGovern was celebrating, the rivals began zeroing in on the size of his California victory margin. And the senator himself was aware of that vulnerability. David Shoemaker reports.
Despite the election night cheers, the California results disappointed McGovern. Aides had prepared a long list of phone calls to be made today, which they hoped would clinch the nomination. But that list was quietly discarded once it became apparent the actual results would not live up to the early polls. This morning, after receiving a congratulatory phone call from Humphrey, McGovern met briefly with reporters, conceded his poor showing in the Jewish vote hurt most, took comfort in finally topping Humphrey among blacks.
This was a very rough, tough campaign in California. I frankly don't expect to have a tougher one. And we survived it in a state that's highly volatile. We survived the kind of a campaign that some might have expected would have knocked me out of the race.
You don't think that Richard Nixon will be rougher on you than Hubert Humphrey?
I don't know. I think Hubert Humphrey's a pretty tough campaigner.
Then McGovern pledged that if elected, he would go to Hanoi seeking the release of American prisoners.
There's no point going to Hanoi just to put on a grandstand act, but if it becomes necessary, in my judgment, to accelerate the end of this war, I'd be willing to go there or any place else that I thought would shorten the war by 24 hours.
Actually, McGovern hoped for a wide enough margin in California to break down the resistance of key party leaders and hand him the nomination within the next 2 weeks. Now he knows he'll have to do it the hard way, one delegate at a time. David Shoemaker, CBS News, Los Angeles.
McGovern's victory came from a broad base of support among various categories of voters. That's according to a CBS News survey of some 2,600 Californians as they cast their ballots at our CBS News selected precincts. The survey, subject to a slight sampling error, of course, indicated that among age groups, McGovern carried the under 40 vote, tied Humphrey in the next category, and lost only the over 60s. Humphrey carried the aerospace workers, worried about their jobs, by 44 to 31%. But in the broad racial and ethnic breakdown, McGovern won with whites, Mexican Americans, and blacks. Since Florida's primary, where McGovern got only 1% of the black vote to Humphrey's 47%, the South Dakota senator has been eating into Humphrey's strength among blacks, and he finally topped him here in California by 44% to 38%. California Congressman Paul McCloskey, the anti-war Republican who unsuccessfully challenged President Nixon early in campaign 72, won renomination to the House. By a 2-to-1 margin, California voters rejected Proposition 9. That was the environmental measure which would have put a very tough anti-pollution control into the state law. Foes of the measure, led by big business and labor, were said to have contributed almost $1.5 million to fight it, on the contention that it would do more economic harm than environmental good. Already out trying to beat McGovern to those available delegates, Humphrey lost no time in getting down to Houston to caucus with Democrats at the National Governors Conference, and Bruce Morton reports.
Hubert Humphrey told the governors he is still a candidate, is not leading a Stop McGovern drive, but will fight McGovern's views on welfare and defense in the party platform. And he said that to win, the Democrats should keep George Wallace in the party.
I emphasize the importance of recognizing the position of Governor Wallace in the party. That we cannot ignore his vote appeal. We'll do so at our peril. That I was hopeful that there would not be a third party, that the Governor of Alabama would stay within the ranks of the Democratic Party, and that we would make it possible for him to do so by respecting him for his endeavors and assuring him of a welcome within the ranks of the Democratic Party.
Would Humphrey consider Wallace as a running mate? He had said no before.
I have said repeatedly that if a man would accept the platform, that he is eligible in my book for a vice presidential nomination, but I think it's highly unrealistic that George Wallace and Hubert Humphrey be on the ticket.
A generation ago, Humphrey led a convention fight for civil rights, and the Dixiecrats walked out. Today, Southern governors were saying that in a McGovern-Humphrey race, they were for Humphrey.
Well, I am neutral and uncommitted, and I'm not a participant in a stop or start movement of any kind. And I think that as of today, that Senator Humphrey more nearly represents the thinking of the American mainstream.
Humphrey said no one urged him to withdraw. McGovern backer Patrick Lucy was asked about any drive to block his man.
Oh, I think there's no evidence of it at all. Governor Carter, who was linked by the press with an alleged Stop McGovern movement, I think would be the first to disavow any such association. And I see no evidence of a Stop McGovern movement at this conference.
For primary losses or no, Humphrey is still a candidate, though once today, asked about running with George Wallace, he said, "In my present condition, it's hardly necessary for me to talk about a running mate." Humphrey says he's not leading any Stop McGovern drive. Neither, apparently, is anybody else here. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Houston.
Ironically, in this climactic California primary, McGovern finds himself stung by the same sort of numbers comparison by which he stung Edmund Muskie in the first primary in New Hampshire. He didn't win as big as he was supposed to. Much of this results from a pre-election survey last week by the respected Mervyn Field, California poll. When it became apparent that McGovern's margin was much smaller, Bill Curtis talked with Field about it in San Francisco.
Mr. Field, looking at those figures again, first for May 31st, you had 20 percentage points spreading between McGovern and Hubert Humphrey, and of course we wound up with only a 6 percentage point difference. Why?
The significant point is that since the McGovern, Wallace, Chisholm, Muskie, and other votes held constant, the 13 percentage point undecided that we had on May 31st, upon analysis, appear to be the kind of Humphrey voter. They are elderly, they were committed voters. We screened people who were not registered, screened out people who were not registered, who were not committed to vote, and apparently Humphrey picked up the lion's share of this 13, plus perhaps a couple of percentage